October 23, 1942. El Alamein, Egypt. You stand at the lip of the line where the desert meets a rail embankment, and the night is full of the sound of measured violence. A pale full moon pours over the packed sand, cold, hard light that picks out the sharp silhouettes of anti-tank obstacles and the ragged shadows of forward posts. Men hunched behind sandbags taste grit on their lips. Artillerymen wipe sand from their eyes with gloved fists. A sergeant on the wire checks compasses by the pale light and says the time aloud like a prayer. 21:40. In the distance, the rumble rises. A slow, building animal and then a single enormous breath, and the desert answers in thunder. Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery has watched this night be prepared for weeks. He stands apart from the men, his black beret set like a crown on a gaunt face, cape collar turned up against the desert wind. He smells petrol and shell smoke and the faint metallic tang of 1,000 shells hanging in the air. Behind him, the 8th Army, a motley of British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian, and Free French units, alongside formations from Poland and Greece, holds its breath. Montgomery's plan, cold, precise, almost surgical, will begin with a grinding barrage and a slow infantry advance to clear paths through the Axis minefields. Operation Lightfoot. The aim is not to dash but to break and then strangle. The timetable in his pocket is as much metallurgy as it is hope. National Army Museum +1 on the Axis side on the coastal plain. The silhouette of Rommel's defensive machine waits. Not complacent, but stretched thin. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, has spent months feeling for weaknesses in the 8th Army like a man testing a wound. He believes in mobility, in rapid, concentrated armored punches. His Africa Corps and Italian allies have learned the desert's cruelty and its gifts. They have also learned what it is to be mocked in Allied propaganda as the unstoppable machine and, in private mess halls, to scorn the desert rats counting the 7th Armored Division, whose fox insignia and reputation for hard fighting were a particular irritation to German and Italian officers. Yet here on this moonlit night, that same mockery tastes different. Bait on the table of war. Wikipedia A's the first whistle goes. Guns that have been trained and zeroed for weeks cough and then scream. 800+ field and medium guns rake the forward belts. Every explosion sends a fountain of sand and a choked, glittering bloom of dust into the air. The barrage is not random. It is mapped like a city plan. Each battery given a street to burn. Each battery's roll a metronome for the infantry and engineers who will follow. Behind the smoke and concussion, sappers, sullen, steely men in patched uniforms. Edge forward on hands and knees with mine probes that are more promise than tool. Feeling for the lumps and wires that will mean death. You can hear the sapper's boots scrape the sand. The sharp metallic ping as probe meets rim of a mine. They talk in the brief, clipped sentences of men who keep lives measured in minutes. Meanwhile, the infantry advance, a slow, methodical line of bayonets and rifles, each man feeling the weight of the tank columns that should come behind them. Wikipedia +1, it is not only the ground that moves. Above, RAF fighters and bombers shred the night sky. Their engines a high keening that makes conversation impossible at a distance. Anti-aircraft tracers stitch the air into a lattice of orange thread. Down below, a tank crew in a Grant murmurs, "Keep her steady, Joe, sand in the carb," and she coughs. A Sherman in another company coughs and starts. The engines smell of hot metal and oil. The tanks move like a slow, ponderous tide intent on breaking a beach of steel. The desert rats, grubby, loose-lipped men with fox badges on their sleeves, drive their Crusader and Sherman cruisers with a mix of stubbornness and a grin that refuses to be extinguished. Their confidence has long been the joke of Axis radio rooms, but there's a hard edge to that grin tonight. Wikipedia and the forward observation posts, officers with maps and smoked lenses hunch over reports from patrols that came back with bleeding hands and empty packs. Their notes are spasms of urgency, mine concentrations, a sighting of a German anti-tank battery, a report of Italian engineers reinforcing a berm. Montgomery's staff updates him in clipped bursts. He accepts them with a face as unreadable as a sand dune. This is the moment when training is expected to meet luck. When months of logistics and supply, convoys of fuel and shells that crept across Mediterranean decks and rutted desert tracks, must turn into bodies and steel in the right place. The plan is a lattice of small gambits: pin, breach, widen, then press. If one part fails, the others must absorb the shock. National Army Museum +. The first phase is a question of inches and courage. A lieutenant kneels beside a mortar and checks the angle again, sweat cooling on his brow despite the night. A private stares at the barbed wire and thinks of home, of rain, of a bed that isn't sand. The men do not speak of glory. They speak of staying together, of watching the man on their left. The bombardment rolls on, the desert shaking with the voices of guns. Somewhere in the dark, the minefields whisper the names of those who will not step through them, and when the engineers start cutting paths and the tanks start to move, and the infantry press forward under a sky full of flares, it will become, in the rawest sense, an encounter. Man against man, plan against plan, will against will. The Axis had mocked the desert rats. On this night, the desert itself, full of mines and cunning and a bitter history of supply lines and attrition, would reveal whether that mockery was presumption or prophecy. The bombardment has gone on for hours now, and the horizon is a pulsing wound of orange and red. Each blast hurls sand skyward in thick choking curtains. The desert floor trembles, the air thick with cordite and fear. Somewhere behind the thunder, a signal flare streaks green, the prearranged cue. Infantry forward. Columns of men, stretched and silent, rise from their shallow cover and move into the inferno. Their faces are streaked with dust and the gray powder of exploded shells. Every few steps, someone trips a wire or stumbles over a half-buried obstacle. The Axis minefields, what Rommel himself once called the Devil's Gardens, stretch out like a man-made hell. Tens of thousands of mines, anti-personnel and anti-tank, lie in patient silence, waiting for a misstep. In the glow of the bombardment, sappers crawl ahead with mine probes in one hand and white tape in the other, marking narrow corridors through the killing zones. One false movement and a man becomes a flare. The first explosion is a dull thud. A scream follows, cut short. But the rest press on. Courage in this place is not a charge. It's a steady shuffle forward when every instinct says to freeze. Behind them, the tanks of the 9th Armored Brigade grind into motion, treads clanking like steel drums. Each driver strains to keep within the narrow cleared lanes, a serpentine path invisible except for the flicker of white tape glinting in moonlight. One wrong turn and 50 tons of metal can vanish in a single blast. A Crusader tank veers slightly off course. A muffled detonation, a burst of flame under the hull. It lurches, settles, and then the crew bursts from the hatches, one man limping, another on fire. No one stops, the radio nets are chaos. Static and clipped voices compete with the shriek of shells and the rumble of armor. Blue 1 to Blue 3, path clear to checkpoint Baker. Repeat, Baker. Move now. Above the din, the guttural roar of German 88mm guns cuts through, precise, cold, unflinching. They've zeroed the cleared lanes. Shells slice into the packed ranks of British tanks, each impact blooming into a fireball that lights the desert like dawn. In his command post, Rommel's deputy, General Wilhelm von Thoma, listens to reports come in through the crackle of field radio. He knows the British barrage is too heavy to counter directly, so he gambles on attrition. Let the minefields do their work, then hit the survivors with the 21st Panzer Division once they're entangled. His staff officers smirk when they mention the desert rats. They dig well, one jokes, but can they bite? Von Thoma's answer is quiet. If they keep coming after this, they can. But the British do keep coming. The 51st Highland Division pushes forward under cover of darkness, their bagpipes silent but their determination loud in the crunch of boots on sand. To their south, Australians advance in parallel, their commanders shouting over the din in clipped, fierce tones. Artillery continues to roll forward in pre-calculated increments, a creeping barrage that moves 100 yards every 3 minutes, always just ahead of the men, a mechanical heartbeat guiding the attack. By dawn, the desert is a wasteland of churned sand, burning tanks and scattered bodies. The sun, pitiless and white, climbs over the battlefield, revealing what the night has hidden. The British have carved 2 narrow corridors through the minefields, corridors barely wide enough for armor to pass, but wide enough for hope. Montgomery's staff map shows the tiniest of advances, 2 miles gained, perhaps less. But in this place where every inch is paid in blood, it is a beginning. The plan is holding. The men know it too. As the morning heat builds, exhausted infantrymen slump beside their rifles, staring at the smoke columns rising to the west. The desert wind carries the smell of oil and burnt rubber. The mocking laughter of Axis officers, the condescension about the rats of the desert seems far away now. The Eighth Army has bled, but it has not broken, and as the engineers work feverishly to widen the corridors for tanks, as the artillery lines reposition for the next phase, one phrase passes from trench to trench. Low, quiet, fierce. Now we've got our teeth in them. The morning of October 24th brings not calm but a deceptive stillness, the kind that only deserts and war can conspire to create. The sand, churned to powder by tracks and shells, lies like a fog across the ground. The air tastes metallic. For the men of the Eighth Army, it feels as if the world itself is holding its breath. At 07:15, the first sign of movement shivers along the horizon, black dots, growing larger, fanning out across the pale sand. Through field glasses, the shape resolves into a formation of panzers, their engines howling against the silence. The counterattack has begun. Rommel's Africa Corps, gaunt and sun-scorched but still lethal, surges forward like a coiled spring released. Rommel himself is not far behind. The Field Marshal, thinner now than in his glory days at Tobruk, stands in the turret of his command vehicle, goggles around his neck, a map fluttering in his gloved hand. He's returned from Germany just days earlier, summoned back to face the collapse of his army's supply lines and the rising tide of Allied confidence. Now, surveying the burning horizon, he knows his situation is desperate, yet his instincts sharpen in desperation. If he can crush the British spearheads before they consolidate, he might still hold the line. Strike fast, strike hard, he tells General von Thoma over the radio. We hit them before they can widen their breaches. No time to wait. The panzers come on, sleek predators in the morning glare. Panzer III and IV models, their armor sand-caked and patched from weeks of battle. German anti-tank crews crouch beside their 88mm guns, those long, lean weapons that have haunted British tankers since the Desert War began. When the first British Sherman's crest arrives, the guns open up. The effect is immediate and brutal. An entire troop of tanks disappears in a heartbeat. Armor that had seemed invincible under British fire now burns like kindling under the German counterblow. Smoke boils upward, thick and black. The radio chatter spikes. Frantic calls for smoke screens, for counter-battery fire, for stretcher bearers. From his command post, Montgomery listens, his face unreadable. Reports filter in. Heavy tank losses in the north. Infantry pinned down near Kidney Ridge. Axis armor advancing. His staff exchange worried glances. Montgomery, however, simply marks the map with his pencil and murmurs, "Let them come." The Eighth Army, unlike its earlier incarnations, is not a brittle force anymore. It is layered, built to absorb punishment. Montgomery's plan has anticipated Rommel's counterattack. The British forward units begin to fall back deliberately, drawing the panzers deeper into the kill zones pre-sighted by artillery and anti-tank batteries. As Rommel's spearhead crosses into these zones, the British guns awaken. The ground shakes under the concentrated fire of hundreds of 25-pounders, firing at near point-blank ranges. Shells fall like rain, and within minutes the advancing German tanks are engulfed in flame and dust. Still, Rommel's men fight with a fury born of experience and pride. They maneuver flank and press. Italian armored divisions, notably the Ariete, join the fray to the south, their crews fighting with grim determination despite outdated equipment. The battlefield dissolves into a nightmare of noise, the clatter of machine guns, the groan of stricken tanks, the cries of men trying to drag comrades from burning wrecks. In the midst of it all, Sergeant Bill Carr of the 1st Royal Tank Regiment keeps his crew steady inside their Sherman. Sandfly. The interior is hellishly hot, the air acrid with cordite. Over the intercom, Carr barks orders, his voice hoarse but steady. "Target the lead panzer, 2 o'clock, fire!" The gunner squeezes the trigger and the main gun booms. The shell hits home. The panzer lurches, smokes, then stills. "That's for Tobruk," Carr mutters, more to himself than anyone else. By midday, the desert is a furnace. The British hold, battered but unbroken. Rommel's assault slows, then halts. His tanks, once his proud advantage, now sit crippled under a curtain of Allied artillery fire. He climbs onto the step of his half-track, scanning the horizon through his binoculars. "They've learned," he says quietly. "The British have learned." His staff waits for orders, but he doesn't give any for a long while. In that silence, the Desert Fox realizes that the enemy he once dismissed Those scrappy desert rats have turned into something far more dangerous. Patient predators who've studied his every move. As dusk creeps over the dunes, the burning wrecks of panzers glow like dying embers. The night belongs to no one, but the balance has shifted. Night falls again over El Alamein, but there is no peace. The horizon still burns, black smoke crawling into a bruised sky. The desert wind howls through the wreckage, carrying with it the stench of oil and scorched metal. Somewhere out in that vast darkness, men dig, fight, bleed, and whisper prayers no chaplain will ever hear. The second night of the battle is one of endurance. The artillery never truly stops. Its rhythm slows at times but never ceases, a heartbeat of steel keeping time over an endless graveyard of dunes. Each shell's concussion shakes loose sand from shattered tanks and sends shivers down the backs of the men crouched in foxholes. Inside those pits, soldiers talk in low voices. They share tins of bully beef, water from canteens too hot to drink, and jokes that no one laughs at. The desert amplifies every sound: the squeal of a jammed gun, the metallic rattle of tank treads, the moan of a wounded man somewhere out in the dark. The battlefield is alive, restless, waiting. Montgomery walks through his forward HQ, a tent half buried in sandbags lit by the dull glow of oil lamps. The air is thick with dust and tension. His staff officers hover over maps, tracing lines with grease pencils, marking losses and radioing orders to scattered divisions. Every report from the front is a mix of agony and progress, heavy casualties but ground gained. "Hold them," Montgomery says quietly. "Just hold them, and tomorrow we strike again." His tone is measured, but his eyes burn with intensity. This is the test he has prepared his army for, not a quick duel of armor, but a sustained grind designed to break the Axis spine. Out on the line, Major Jeffrey Keyes of the 7th Armored Division peers through binoculars, the night lenses giving the battlefield an eerie green glow. He can see the outlines of Axis vehicles repositioning, hear the distant bark of German 88s. Somewhere beyond that invisible curtain of sand, Rommel is still out there, wounded in pride. Not yet beaten, the Germans too are suffering. Their fuel convoys from Tripoli have been mauled by Allied aircraft. Supply lines stretch thin, every gallon of petrol rationed. Mechanics cannibalize wrecked panzers for spare parts. Hungry soldiers chew dry biscuits and joke bitterly that even the sand tastes of defeat. Yet their discipline holds. The Afrika Korps fights on, stubborn and skilled. At midnight, a flare goes up. The British artillery opens up once more, this time targeting the Axis supply routes behind the front. Shells fall on ammunition dumps, convoys, and command posts. The desert becomes a storm of fire and noise. Italian units near the southern flank buckle under the barrage, their positions collapsing into chaos. The 9th Australian Division seizes the moment, launching a fierce assault toward Tel El Isa Ridge. The fighting there is savage, close quarters, hand-to-hand, bayonets flashing in the flare light. The Australians move like ghosts through the trenches, clearing them room by room, shell hole by shell hole. One corporal later writes, "The air was so thick with dust and smoke you could hardly tell friend from foe until you felt the uniform." By dawn, Tel El Isa is in Allied hands. The price is high, bodies scattered across the slope, men slumped in silence beside burned-out machine guns. But the ridge holds. From it, the British can see deep into the Axis lines, their artillery observers calling in precise fire that tears through German logistics hubs. Rommel, in his field truck somewhere west of the front, receives the news grimly. He knows the situation is deteriorating fast. His forces are running out of reserves, his men are exhausted, and his fuel tanks are nearly dry. The once proud Axis machine has become a brittle shell. Still, he refuses to retreat. "Every hour we hold," he tells von Thoma, "is another we deny them victory. We fight to the last shell." But even the desert, that cruel equalizer, seems to favor the British now. The wind shifts east, blowing dust into Axis gun pits. The 8th Army's supply convoys, organized, relentless, keep rolling forward from Alexandria. Fuel, water, shells, everything arrives on time. In the small hours before sunrise, as men on both sides lie half-conscious from exhaustion, a whisper runs through the British ranks. New orders. The next phase is coming. Montgomery's plan is unfolding exactly as intended. Slow, merciless, inevitable. When the first light of October 25th bleeds over the horizon, It falls upon a battlefield transformed, one side entrenched, the other encircled, both bound by the same stretch of cursed sand. Yet for the first time in months, the Eighth Army feels something dangerous to the enemy and precious to themselves. Confidence. November the 2nd, 1942. The sun rises blood red over El Alamein, its light filtered through a haze of smoke and dust. What remains of the desert looks like another planet, a wasteland of charred tanks, splintered trucks, and cratered earth. For days, both sides have battered each other into exhaustion, but now Montgomery prepares to deliver the final blow. The operation has a simple, brutal name: Supercharge. At 01 hours in the dim pre-dawn gloom, the engines of hundreds of tanks cough and growl to life. The men of the 9th Armored Brigade sit inside their machines, helmets pressed to radios waiting for the word. The plan is audacious: to smash through the Axis northern flank near Tel El Akakir, tear open a breach wide enough for the 1st Armored Division to pour through, and collapse Rommel's line once and for all. The crews are bone-tired. Some haven't slept in 2 days, yet there's a strange calm before the storm, a sense that this attack will decide everything. Sergeant Bill Carr, still with his Sherman Sandfly, checks his revolver, wipes a film of dust from the sight, and grins to his gunner. "Well, lad, time to wake the fox." At precisely 1:05, the night detonates. 1,000 British guns fire as one, a rolling barrage of fire that rips the desert apart. The noise is indescribable, a thunder that seems to flatten the very air. Each explosion flashes like lightning through the sand haze. The tanks surge forward behind the barrage, their tracks grinding over the blackened ground. Infantry from the 51st Highland Division advance alongside, their boots crunching on spent shell casings, rifles held tight. Ahead of them lie Rommel's last defensive lines. Belts of mines, entrenched anti-tank guns, and the battered remnants of the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions. The German and Italian gunners are waiting. When the British come into range, the 88s open up once again. Their shells punch through the darkness, slicing through the first wave of tanks like scythes through wheat. In minutes, the desert becomes chaos. Tanks explode in sheets of orange flame. Radios crackle with confusion. The 9th Armored Brigade, leading the charge, loses half its strength in the first hour, but they keep going. One commander's last transmission before his tank is hit is recorded as, "We're getting murdered out here, but we're going through." The 1st Armored Division follows in their wake, engines screaming, dust clouds boiling behind them. This is no elegant maneuver. It's a slugging match, machine against machine, courage against inevitability. Every few hundred yards, another tank is hit. Another crew climbs out only to be caught by machine gun fire, but the line keeps moving. Slowly, brutally, the British armor begins to grind down Rommel's defenses. From his command truck, Rommel watches the unfolding nightmare. His face is gray with exhaustion. A bandage wraps one hand, the result of a shrapnel wound from the previous night. His fuel reserves are nearly gone, his supply truck shredded by Allied aircraft. Radio reports tell him the truth he doesn't want to admit. The line is breaking. At Oit Elwind, a staff officer bursts into the tent. "Herr Feldmarschall, the Italians on our left flank are retreating. Our Ieta division is finished." Rommel doesn't look up. He stares at his map, at the red lines that have meant pride and victory for 2 years, now crumbling under the weight of numbers and firepower. After a long silence, he says quietly, "We have done what we could. The Desert Fox has run out of desert. Outside, the Afrika Korps fights with desperate valor. Even as fuel runs dry, crews use what ammunition remains to the last shell. Some tanks are abandoned, their crews fighting on foot with pistols and grenades. For every yard gained, the British pay in blood, but the momentum is theirs now. The 8th Army's artillery never relents. Each time the German guns pause, British 25-pounders answer with renewed fury. By mid-morning, the breakthrough is real. The Axis line near Tel El Akakir buckles. British armor floods through the gap like water through a breached dam. Infantry follow, securing trenches and capturing hundreds of prisoners. Many dazed, starving, their uniforms stiff with sand and sweat. The radio at Montgomery's HQ crackles with confirmation. He doesn't celebrate. He simply nods once and says to his staff, "That will do." Back on the battlefield, Sergeant Carr climbs from his Sherman, looks across the smoldering plain, and sees the Black Cross insignia of a burning Panzer. For the first time since the war began, he allows himself a small smile. Far to the west, Rommel orders a general withdrawal toward Fuka. The Afrika Korps, the pride of the Axis in North Africa, is in retreat. The Eighth Army, once mocked as hesitant and brittle, now advances with unstoppable momentum. As the sun sets on November the 2nd, the desert glows red again, not from fire this time, but from victory. The desert rats have bitten deep, and this time they will not let go. November 4th, 1942. The wind has shifted west, carrying with it the bitter scent of burning fuel and the distant rattle of retreat. The sun hangs low over the Egyptian horizon, casting long shadows across the ruins of Rommel's once proud army. At dawn, reconnaissance patrols of the British Eighth Army push cautiously through the smoke. The sound of engines sputtering fades into the distance, Axis convoys fleeing west toward Fuka and Mersa Matruh. The battlefield behind them is littered with the carcasses of tanks and trucks, blackened silhouettes half buried in sand. Among them lie German and Italian soldiers, some still at their guns, their final stands frozen in the still heat. A message comes crackling over Montgomery's field radio. Enemy in full retreat. Telelakakir secure. Our armor advancing unopposed. Montgomery exhales once, then straightens. Around him, his staff breaks into restrained cheers. The Eighth Army, once derided, once broken and scattered, has triumphed. El Alamein is theirs, but for the men who fought here, the victory feels heavy. In the forward line, stretcher-bearers move silently among the dead, marking positions with white tape. Sappers clear paths through still-active minefields to reach stranded comrades. The wounded lie in rows beside wrecked vehicles, faces dusted in fine sand that clings to sweat and blood alike. Sergeant Bill Carr sits on the hull of his Sherman. Sandfly, its paint blistered from the heat of battle. He watches as columns of prisoners, hundreds of Italians, dozens of Germans, trudge past under guard. Many look relieved, not defeated. They are thin, hungry, and hollow-eyed. Victims of Rommel's collapsing supply lines as much as of the guns that broke them. Carr tosses a cigarette packet to one of them, a young Italian barely 20. The man nods in quiet gratitude. Out to the west, Rommel's convoy races across the open desert. Inside his command car, the field marshal sits slumped, his hand pressed to his temple. The weight of defeat presses like the desert heat itself, suffocating, inescapable. He knows the truth. This is not just the loss of a battle. This is the collapse of the Axis dream in North Africa. For nearly 2 years, his Afrika Korps had defied impossible odds, outnumbered, undersupplied, yet feared. They had mocked the British as rats, burrowers scurrying across the sands. But those same desert rats have outlasted him. The nickname that once carried contempt now carries legend. Rommel gazes out at the endless expanse of dunes, the setting sun painting the horizon in shades of blood and gold. So this is how it ends, he murmurs. His adjutant says nothing. There is nothing left to say. Behind him at El Alamein, British armor rolls west in perfect columns. The Eighth Army banner, the red, white, and black shield of the Crusader cross, and flutters against the wind. What began as a desperate defense has become a relentless pursuit. The Allies press onward toward Libya, toward Tunisia, toward ultimate victory. That night, as Montgomery surveys the field from the ridge near Ruvaisat, the desert is eerily quiet. The guns have fallen silent for the first time in weeks. The only sound is the hiss of wind across the dunes. The moonlight gleams on shattered tank hulls, German gray, British green, Italian ochre, all reduced to the same shade of ruin. He turns to his staff and says softly, "This was not the end of the war, but it was the end of the beginning." Those words will echo far beyond the desert, repeated in speeches, in history books, in the hearts of men who fought under that merciless sun. For the Axis, El Alamein was a reckoning, the moment when arrogance met endurance, when supply lines and steel could no longer match discipline and resolve. For the Eighth Army, it was vindication. The desert rats, once scorned, once written off as relics of a faltering empire, had not only survived, but crushed the most feared commander of the desert war. And as dawn breaks over the sands once more, the silence carries a strange peace. The desert has taken its toll, but it has also borne witness. The fox has fled, the rats remain.